Mid-Continent Public Library's board, and it's my pleasure to chair the meeting and to start the meeting off. And we will start off with the roll call, if we might. And we should do, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Charlotte, Steve Rolling,
Here.
Ron,
Morning.
Michelle.
And John.
Yep, I'm
Everyone's-
here. I had to unmute.
Thank you. Everyone's here, John.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll have the what is the next item? Then we'll have the minutes
Agenda,
of the
approval of the agenda.
approval of the agenda. Yes. We had made some adjustments in the agenda. You probably noticed that we are asking for a closed session, and that was not originally on the agenda as planned. But we decided that since there were some matters that dealt with the work of this committee, and also with the upcoming budget, why we thought it was appropriate to try to add this here. And part of that requires that we have an attorney with us, and we do have an attorney here, Jonathan Zur, who is the attorney for our new foundation. And I might say that and remind everyone that this is the Library Giving Day. And the foundation is looking forward to matching any gifts that are made by members or anyone else, as I understand it, but certainly by members. So we invite you to consider that and keep it in mind during this day. It's not an April Fool's joke here. This is for real. And we're hoping to get some money to help people with connectivity to the internet that they might not otherwise have without help from the library. So we hope you'll keep that in mind today. Okay. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Steve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second
I
to
can-
approve the as submitted. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Okay, the agenda is approved as submitted. Now we have the minutes of January 7th, 2021 to consider and approve. So as everyone had an opportunity to review those minutes of January 7th.
Yes, I move approval.
All right, Steve moves approval. Is there a second to the approval of the January 7th minutes?
Second.
Been second. All those in favor say aye.
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 All right, the amendments have been approved, and we're ready to start into the order of business. I just have a couple of comments to start into this. One of our main functions, of course, as a finance committee is to assist the administration with the budget and to make recommendations to our full board about whether to approve the budget or not. So we're starting in that period now where our new annual budget is under consideration, and considerable work is already being done by our administration. But at this time, I felt, and we usually do this, that it's a good idea to let the administration talk to us a little bit about the assumptions that they're using to base the budget upon this year, and go into that in some little detail so that we have an opportunity to give some advice and to learn from the assumptions that will support the upcoming budget. And I think that's important because it just gives an opportunity for us who will have to make a recommendation to the board to kind of weigh in a little bit on that. This is particularly important this year because we've had so many changes, so many things that are different. We've never had a year in a budget like this in the history of the library. And so there's a lot to talk about. So that sort of tees up our first section of the agenda. And if and it relates to one of the items that we'll be discussing. So I don't know whether we want to consider this item for a vote at this time, or whether we want to wait until after we've gone through the discussion in the second item. But I'll let you take that, Steve, from here.
Sure.
If you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you, John. So what we do, just again, I think John did a really nice job of teeing this up for me. But before we get to 21, 22, we need to talk about what's happening as toward the end of 2021. And so effective today is, April, May, June, we're in the last quarter of 2021. And so just to kind of reset, bring it down from 50,000 feet down to 10,000 feet, that we all worked very hard. And by we, I mean the people in this room and in this meeting, along with staff, worked very hard to take several tactical and strategic steps to put us in the best possible position through this very unusual year. Because even at this time last year, we knew things were very unusual, and we were trying to make things more predictable and more manageable. We put forward several different things. We did a temporary hiring freeze. We decreased spending in some areas. We increased spending in other areas to help with PPE and things like that. My feeling, and really this is almost a personal philosophy of mine in general, is that the 80-20 rule almost always applies in every circumstance and situation. And my personal feeling, if you would have asked me, what is it that we're really trying to accomplish? I would have said, well, we're trying to leverage the 80-20 rule. We're going to have a whole bunch of strategies and tactics. 80% of them will work, 20% won't, but the bottom line is we'll be in good shape. Well, as it turned out, and as we enter the last quarter of the year, we've discovered that nearly every tactic worked. So it wasn't an 80-20 rule, it's more like a 95-5 rule is what we wound up with. And this has resulted in Mid-Continent Public Library being in a very favorable position coming out of this particular fiscal year. So with that said, what I'll do just real quickly is have you take a look at our 25-year plan. So I think that's in your handout. And Cody, if you could put that up real quick, that's the really big spreadsheet. Actually, that's not in the packet. No, but that's okay. I mean, it's in the. Yeah, actually, the 25-year plan's not, because it's a really, really big file. But let's be working on getting that up. But let me tell you about the 25-year plan. Oh, yeah, that's it. It's a spreadsheet with a lot of numbers on it. So the concept behind the 25-year plan was back in 2016, 17, when we were trying to figure out, is it cost beneficial for us to finance the capital plan? What would the impact of the long-term debt be? Things like that. We actually put together not a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan, but a 25-year plan. So basically saying, the original comparison was, how long will it take us to complete the capital plan if we do pay as we go? We discovered the answer to that was 25 years, which is how we came up with the 25-year plan. And so the key things to look on this, there's a lot of numbers here on this spreadsheet, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but there's really two really important lines to look at. There's a line, it's actually line 18 of the spreadsheet, that says ending fund balance, and the ending fund balance as a percentage of operating budget. The target for this, based on policy and practice, has been for this number to be between 42% and 48%. So basically what we're saying is when we get to June 30, we need to have between 42 and 48% of our expected revenues setting in the bank to get us from July 1 to December 31st, when new revenues start coming in. And if you kind of scan through this real quickly, and like I said, we're not going to spend a lot of time, but generally speaking, we're hovering around 40% or so until we get to our projections around 2032. which is quite a ways in the future. And then we start ramping up around 50%, 57%, and all the way up on the final year of the projection at 78%. Now, as anyone will tell you, any sort of long-term financial plan like this is pretty useless 4 or 5 years out. But what it does show is that there is a plan to manage all of this, and that if everything sort of works to plan, then our ending fund balance is where it needs to be in order for us to continue to provide services, have the revenue we need, and all of that. The other important line to look at here is the ending fund balance in the capital project fund. So this is basically telling us how much money we have in the bank to finish off the capital project fund. As you can see, it does slowly decrease. I mean, it's up as high as $122 million. But it does get, let me go up one. That's not right. It is up as high as $96 million. Does get down to $1.3 million 2 years from now, but then starts building back up again. And again, this is an important benchmark because the principle here is that we're going to get the entire capital project done, which it looks like we get the entire capital project fund done and all the bills paid in 24, 25. And at that particular point, we have a $3.3 million balance in the capital project fund, and then it starts increasing again. And why does it need to increase? It needs to increase so that we can do the maintenance on the buildings that we just fixed and built. So those are sort of the two big benchmarks. And looking at the 25-year plan, I would argue we're in good shape. Really looking at this from a very high level, we're in very good shape. So, like I said, don't want to spend a lot of time on that because it really isn't useful to spend a lot of time on it, particularly 3 or 4 years out. But what I did want to spend more time on is talking about where we are this year in terms of our revenues and where we are in terms of what it is that I would suggest that we might need to be doing about that. So in your handouts, you do have another spreadsheet table. And so the first thing, Cody, if you could bring that up, that's the fund balance spreadsheet. And the first tab we want to open up is the revenue tab. Right. So on the revenue tab, let me get this up in front of me. So what this is showing, going back to what I talked about earlier about the 80-20 rule, what Quan and I started doing, and I want to mention Quan's not here today because he actually has his vaccination opportunity, which actually came right in the middle of the meeting. And he trusted me to present this, so he's going to be calling in as soon as he is available to do that, or he's going to try to. So start with the revenues first. Where are we in terms of revenues? Well, as I've mentioned, we are in a very positive situation in terms of revenues. And so what Quan is suggesting is that we could be looking at what we might characterize as a $9.4 million surplus on our revenues over expenses on the fund balance. And there are several reasons why we're there. So if you go through this line, the first line talks about revenues over expenses from fiscal year 18-19. We had about $1 million revenues over expenses. Typically we would have transferred that $1 million sometime in the fall of 18. The fall of 19. No, it would have been fall of 18 or early 19, but it just wasn't done for one reason or another. So we have $1 million there it's from 2 fiscal years ago. From last fiscal year, FY 19-20, really the exact same thing happened. And but the balance was a little bit higher. It was $2.2 million. And one of what we decided to do as an organization was to keep both of those amounts, the 1 million and the 2.2 million, just setting in the undesignated fund balance for liquidity, because we had no idea what the future was going to bring. And so this would allow us to be really nimble if we had an extra $3.2 million in the fund balance. So that's still sitting there. We haven't tapped it. And that's part of the surplus that we're looking at. As we've been talking about our revenues over expenses situation, we projected very, very light revenue situation. In fact, I think we projected a negative revenue situation for this fiscal year. That has not been the case. Not only has it been positive, it's actually been ahead of what we would have expected. So Quan is suggesting that there's about a $1.5 million increase in revenues above projection that we might want to address in the fund balance. Then the next three lines.
Excuse me, but that particular item is what deserves a lot of discussion as we get on through this, because it really seems impossible that would happen. And I think we should discuss that, but go ahead.
Okay. The next three lines can really be lumped together in terms of why we have them. The estimated personnel expenses, we're looking at bringing those in at 1.4 million below budget. Estimated materials budget, 1.3 million below budget, and estimated operations budget, $2 million below budget. All three of those are based on our spending habits that we did in 2020 for the most part. Personnel was due to that hiring freeze and everything that was associated with it. And so, I don't know. I don't think there's anything much more to say about that one. The materials budget, this one is a little bit more of a head scratcher, not much, but a little bit more of a head scratcher. But basically what we discovered is that publishers, as the pandemic was rolling on, publishers were not making as many new titles available as they normally did. And while it might be beneficial for us to just buy any book, that's not the way we usually operate. We buy books that have good reviews and that are going to be somewhat popular, that people are going to want to read, as opposed to just buying anything. And so that's one of the reasons why that number's there. And then in terms of operations, as I mentioned, we did shift some things around in terms of operation, but still, we weren't driving trucks to every building 6 days a week, for example. And so that's going to have a large impact on our operation. So once all was said and done, Quan and I kind of looked at this. Like I said, our fund balance, we feel, is about $9.4 million above sort of the benchmark, the break even point. So that's kind of where we are in terms of revenues. Let me move to the next tab to talk about how we would like to address that. But before I do, let me pause for a moment and make sure that there are no questions before moving to the next tab where we talk about how to expend some of this.
Just to clarify, the 9.4, that's money in the bank.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we had 6 categories, the 3 million for the first 2 and the 6 plus for the next 4. They were all estimated, but we're not estimating the money in the bank. We're estimating the cause for it. Is that pretty much it?
Correct.
Gotcha.
Correct. Yeah, the money's there. And
exactly. Yeah.
What I'm trying to do is explain to you why the money's there.
Perfect. Okay. Gotcha.
Well, Steve, where is one of the decisions that was made by the board earlier was to not transfer the normal amount of roughly 2.2 million from the operating fund to the capital fund at the end of last budget year. And but the item that we have to discuss and vote on here later for recommendation to the full board is that item of going ahead and completing that transfer. So I don't think you mentioned that up to this point, unless I missed it.
No, that's correct, John. That's actually what I'm going to lead off with on how to address the surplus, is to go back and make good on that. But yes, you're dead on. That's a good transition, unless anybody else has any questions about the revenue side. Okay.
My question is, while we were pleasantly surprised by the revenues we received from our 3 counties, do we have any reason to believe that will not continue for next year?
There's no reason. No, there's no reason. I mean, based on the projections that we have so far, Yeah, I mean, we could get to a point where the Hancock circuit breaker comes into play and forces a rollback, but no, everything right now is suggesting that this is what we should expect.
Okay,
Well, that question that Steve raised is what I had in mind when I made my comments earlier, in that how can we know that the amount, I mean, we depend primarily, almost exclusively on property tax revenues for our income. And we haven't even, I don't think we've seen what we expect to see in the way of people failing to pay their property taxes as the year progresses. It seems to me like there is a chance, and maybe a chance that we want to factor into the budget, that could happen, that we would have a lot of unpaid property taxes going as we go into the year from circumstances that we haven't yet seen play out fully.
It's a fair point, John. You're right. 97% of our revenue comes from property tax. Of that 97, well, 97% comes from property tax. In terms of how it's divided from there, 70% comes from residential property, 30% comes from retail, business property, corporate property taxes, if you will, in terms of their real property. But with all that said, as Quan was pointing out, payments under protest are way down. It was over $1 million last year. It's only $100,000 this year. Amount of revenue that's come in is way up in terms of what we were projecting. It's completely possible, particularly if there's a double dip recession, and particularly if we have a situation where this begins to take more of an impact on people's residential property taxes. There are lots of news stories right now about people as they come out of the pandemic not leasing office space or decreasing their office space commitments. That affects that corporate tax side, the retail and business tax side, as opposed to the residential tax side. I'm shocked. I mean, honestly, this is where I thought what you're describing, John, is exactly what I thought was going to happen, but was going to happen in December, the December that we just passed, while we were still in the heart of the pandemic. You're right. We shouldn't spend like drunken sailors. We always need to be cautious. But unless we run into a double dip, I think we may have rounded the corner.
Okay, well, we'll leave that to the.
Okay. Yeah. So if we go to the next tab, this is where staff is talking about the expenses. And so the very first thing that we have here, the first line is transfer to capital projects fund. And this is precisely what John was talking about, that we made a conscious decision as an organization not to transfer certain money that we typically have from the revenues over expenses into the capital projects fund to help with liquidity. What staff is recommending is that we transfer is a motion to transfer $4 million from the fund balance into the capital projects fund. Doing so will actually meet the $113 million commitment for the entire capital project fund, and will actually put an additional $1 million in the capital projects fund to start helping with to start us helping with building up that balance for maintenance of buildings and for other projects. The next line, now the next lines as we go on are other recommendations that staff have that we think either made themselves apparent to us during the pandemic or just otherwise could be beneficial. So the next one is another transfer to the capital project fund, this in the amount of $275,000. And what this will do is this will essentially create a fund that will allow us to completely pay off the Woodneath House project. If there's any shortfalls in fundraising, if there's any timing issues with receiving grants or any other gifts, then this $275,000 would allow us to get everything paid off, get into the Woodneath House before the end of this fiscal year. And of course, there would still be a commitment to try to raise this amount. But this would cushion us and allow us to move forward.
What's the Garcia thing?
The Garcia shortfall is something that we're going to talk about in closed session.
Okay.
So basically providing a little bit of cash flow for that more than anything else.
Now,
Next
that
line.
doesn't go back on our commitment to the voters on Prop B, right? Because
Steve, I don't believe it does go back on the voters for a couple of reasons. And one reason is that most of in fact, almost all of the outstanding funding that's there, that we're talking about in terms of timing, are essentially the type of things that we would need to buy whether we were in a historic house or not. So we're talking about things like furniture for the staff. We're talking about things like the Wi-Fi equipment that we're going to put into the house. I feel pretty confident that what I said, and certainly what I meant, was that restoration and adaptive use of the house was going to be done through fundraising, and it has been 100%. Where anything that would still be hanging out there would be the types of things that furniture and office equipment that we would have been buying no matter what. So. Okay, so next line is personnel salaries, and staff is recommending a $1 million commitment there. And so what it really is it's about $750,000 pool plus all the added expenses, payroll taxes and things like that. And it's basically taking out of the savings from the personnel expenses and would allow us to fund what is tantamount to a 3.7% payment to employees on the payroll based on average numbers worked May through April, a one-time payment, and it's basically just sharing the system-wide savings with the employees who helped us achieve the system-wide savings during the pandemic. Lots of people worked short, lots of people did things. We can do some things to help people. And so that's one of the ways that staff was recommending spending.
And that'll be a part of the personnel committee's considerations also, right, Steve?
I'll probably bring it up with personnel, but this is actually out of this year's budget. And so we'll talk with the personnel committee, but this is actually a current year expense as opposed to next year's expense. But yeah, we'll bring it up to them.
does this consider this increase is now their base pay? Is that?
No, it's a
Kind of a
one-time.
bonus?
Oh, we can't use that word legally, but some people might consider it that, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
still
Anybody-
performance.
Go
I
ahead.
think it's still performance-based, correct?
It's hard for us to judge performance in 2020. If people were coming to work and doing their job, they were performing. It's just such an unusual year, but the idea is really just a blanket one-time payment for the people who did what they had to do in order for us to continue to serve the public. So,
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
yeah. The next line is employee resources line. This is something that we were looking to add to the budget in '22, but we can actually expend it this year. And it's to help pay for a salary compensation study and evaluation of all of our job descriptions. It's something we hadn't planned to do. We've got the money to do it now, but we had planned to do it in the future.
When is the last time we did that?
I'm not sure if Jennifer's on the line or not, but I want to say.
I'm here.
Oh, yeah, Jennifer, when was that?
Hi, a full classification study. It's been since 2010. Our last compensation study was 2016, so we are due.
Is this a contractor?
Yeah, it'll be with a contractor.
Yes.
We'll do an RFQ. Lockton, I believe, did one for us. I think they did the compensation study 5 years ago. CBiz did the comprehensive one that Jennifer was talking about. So, yeah, that'll be the process. Next line down is electronic resources, which comes out of the materials section. We have a $500,000 bill outstanding balance on our perpetual license for the Kansas City Star Archive. And so what we were looking to do is to use some of our money in the materials budget to pay that off in full, which just decreases some of the long-term debt was our idea there. The next line is in technology services, and you know, to John's point, this line and the line after that, we would certainly be talking with the technology committee about these expenditures. But the first one is to replace all of our self-check hardware for this expenditure amount of $750,000. Part of the reason for that is that our self-check hardware is getting older. We also discovered that we were running into some issues with it the more that it was being used during the pandemic. And so we kind of identified this, have the funds to do it. And so kind of made sense to possibly do it.
Self-check hardware.
It's the actual kiosk, the computer kiosk.
Oh,
that the people,
checkout.
yeah, the checkout hardware.
All right.
Let me skip down one and do the other technology service, and then we'll back up and do the professional services. So the next one was to update, upgrade, and replace our enterprise storage service. That's sort of our cloud storage and enterprise storage. The existing systems are becoming, they're again getting dated, about 10 years old in that ballpark. A little bit less reliable, and some of our new work processes we discovered during the pandemic would suggest that we do need to update that hardware. And so we have the money to do it. The pandemic kind of identified that it was a little bit more of a pressing need. And so we were suggesting to use the funds for that purpose. In both of these cases, staff would recommend transfer to the capital projects fund for both of these. So that way Brian and his team can do this thoughtfully as opposed to quickly. You never want to do things quickly when it comes to technology. You want to do them thoughtfully. And so if we transfer the funds to the capital project fund, then it would allow Brian to straddle the fiscal year to do this in a more thoughtful process.
Are these enterprise storage systems we own?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, so if we go beyond a couple of walls here in this room, we'll be in our computer data center. And that's what we're talking about.
Update, yeah.
Updating that hardware. Yeah, absolutely.
Say, Steve, this is Brian.
Hey, Brian, go ahead.
So we have one storage system here at headquarters. We have a disaster recovery site at the Smithville branch that we replicate all of our servers and backups to. It would be replacing both ends of that. And we upgraded those the last time about 6 years ago. And in 2 years, they will be end of life, basically. So we can't get support on them or anything like that. So we're getting ahead of the game and want to get those swapped out before that happens.
So just two more suggestions that staff had. So another one was professional services. We are working, we have worked with a industrial engineer to help us with process improvement. We talked with him recently, and he was willing to take on a review of 3 of our processes over the next year.
Which processes are they?
The processes are the technical services, which is where we, take the books from our vendor and process them and make them available. Basically turn them from the type of book you buy at Barnes and Noble versus the type of book that you see at the library, plastic covers, all of it, creating the online records. He's worked with that department before, so this would be sort of like a checkup more than anything else. That's number one. Number 2 is our holds processing, our interlibrary loans, so that when he helped us develop the process, so that when you request a book from one location, it gets to another location and has the label on the spine and all of that. And as you can imagine, that's a very labor intensive process. Again, he just wants to go in and make sure we haven't done any backsliding and make sure that we're still as efficient and effective as we need to be. And then the third process is a full evaluation of our community programming department, which that's the department that helps us with the, once we actually get back to the in-person programming, that we're doing our contracting, our consideration of programs, our placement of programs, all of those sorts of things in the most cost-effective way possible. We will be the second library that he has worked with on the community programming part. So actually, Susan has been talking with him a little bit more in terms of specific details. The amount that we put in there was a placeholder. It probably will not be nearly that amount, but we just had to put a placeholder in for some reason. It's got to cost something. And so then the last thing that staff was recommending was a boost to the community relations and planning budget by $125,000. And the idea here is to enhance our advertising and promotional activities to help people get reacquainted with the library post-pandemic. So we're going to be adding some new activities anyway, but this would allow us to really add a lot of activities. And it's just the idea that as more and more people become more and more accustomed and more acclimated to what's happening in the outside world, we don't want them to forget about the library as a way to do this. And this is a great opportunity for us to really enhance our programming around, not our program, but our promotion around the programs that we offer. And a really good reason to do that. So we were looking to enhance the budget that way. So once you add all of that up, the grand total there is $7.3 million. If you remember, if we go back and we talk about what we were talking about in terms of revenues over expenses, 9.4 million. So it's 2.1 million still setting in there in terms of revenues over expenses. If the committee is satisfied not only with this strategy, but also this tactic, then what staff would ask is for a motion to recommend to the full board a transfer of $5,525,000 from the operating fund balance to the capital project fund. And then that would allow us to do all the things that we were talking about. So that concludes this part. We'll talk more about projected revenue in 2021 and 22, but I'm interested in hearing your thoughts, concerns.
Well, Steve, just mention quickly again the components. What was the total figure that you just mentioned?
Right. So the total, the total figure to transfer is essentially $5.5 million. The total expenditure is $7.3 million. So some of that expenditure is just coming straight out of this year. And I'm just talking to you about this. It's mostly because I just want you to know what I'm doing. I mean,
Do we have any rules about this, what we can do or can't do?
Sure. Yeah, there are lots of rules.
So in case the bubble bursts and there's no more money, we're still covered, right?
For at least a year.
At least a year. That's
For at least
all
a
you
year.
can plan.
Yeah, right. And so what I'm suggesting is that there are some things in here, like, for example, the very last thing I talked about, the $125,000 for promotion. Or if we go up and we talk about the purchase of the materials, the $530,000 to pay off the digital Kansas City Star amount. Both of those amounts I could just do. I mean, I could just spend them within the parameters of what the policy is, but I'm being transparent. I want you to know what I'm doing with the extra funding. Where we really, and advice. I mean, if you guys think this is a bad idea, I would like to know that. But the main thing that we will ultimately need is that transfer, to transfer part of the fund balance out of operating into capital for the purposes that we talked about before. That does require board action.
So
Steve, where do you get the 5.5? I know where the 4 million and the 275, where's the rest of it come from?
So if I did my math right, and this is where it's dangerous because Quan's not here, but it's 4 million, and then plus the 750,000 in technology services for the self-check hardware. And then the
270,000 from
the
the
two,
capital.
right, the
Prop.
275, and then the technology, and then the 500,000 for the enterprise storage system. If I did that right, that should be 5.5 million.
Okay. My other comment, and it's not really a question or a suggestion, just a comment. I commend you for doing the salary compensation study and the evaluation of job description, all that. My recollection is when I first came on the board several years ago, we did something similar to this. And we discovered we were way behind the curve because the economy was bad and we didn't do pay raises for quite a few years. And to the credit of the board, and I think the credit of Steve and your staff, we've slowly tried to build that back up to where we're more competitive. My guess is that, maybe I should say, what is your guess? Are we behind still? And is our study going to show us that we still have catch up to do, or you think we're caught up? My reason for asking the question is maybe a better time maybe we ought to reserve that $1 million to see if we need to use that to reply to the compensation study so that we can take pretty immediate action once we get the study results.
So there are a couple of comments and a couple of things that we want to react to, and I know Jennifer will jump in if I misspeak at all. But I would say you're absolutely right. 5 years ago when we did the study with Lockton, we were woefully inadequate. Now I would suggest that we're no longer woefully inadequate in terms of our compensation. We may still have some holes in some places where we need to make up, but we are not in the same place where we were 5 years ago. We have been able to do more than tread water.
Great.
We've been able to keep up, but there's probably still some holes. And of course, that's why you do multiple points in time studies, is to figure out exactly where those holes developed. The second comment about the $1 million is the reason that we were suggesting a strategy like this is that this manages all of this as a one-time payment. So if we were to do the study, discover that we were inadequate, use the $1 million to address the inadequacies, then what we've done is we've used one-time money to pay for an ongoing expense. And we're going to have to figure out where that $1 million comes from in the future. So what we suggested was to manage this as a one-time expense. But what you'll see when we get to our next agenda item is that we have been thinking about exactly what you're talking about, Steve. And in the proposal that we're going to make to the Personnel Committee later this month is anticipating some of that and is funding the personnel line accordingly. Jennifer, is that fair?
That would be fair. And Steve, I would be, the board has taken our recommendations. I would be shocked if we have a whole lot of ground to make up. I think that we're probably on track. I think that a couple of, and we know about a couple of different areas where we really need to look at it again. And also the kind of that bottom end coming up because of the increases to minimum wage that have been tracking at about 4.5% a year. So there may be some work to do on that end, but we've been trying to stay ahead of that. And I think we've done a really good job there. And then to Steve's point is that we're looking to look at 2 or 3 years down the road, and also really looking at how the jobs have changed. 11 years is a long time between, we've done ad hoc adjustments of job descriptions as we've gone through here, but technology skills have to be greater. People's skill sets just, have needed to change over time. And so needing that classification study as well to make sure that what people are actually doing now matches up with those job descriptions, which match up with, what they would be, what is a fair market rate for them to get paid.
So do we need a motion to?
Yes.
Yeah. I think I think Charlotte's about ready to make a motion, but I think Ron had one more question.
Yeah, just maybe more of a comment than a question. If we look at the $50,000 that's allocated, the portion that goes to the community outreach is, let's say it's a third, so it's 17. And you take a look at the last number, 250,000. I think if you look at that to the 5, we're only talking about a small percentage. And I'm wondering if you might be a little bit skimpy on that in terms of getting the outreach. From a distance, I've seen incredible talent in like Dylan and Kira and Steve and Richie and these guys. I'm wondering if maybe, at least just on the numbers of the allocation to them is really sufficient.
Yeah, I mean, it's an augmentation. I'm not sure if Jim's on the call or not, but he could talk a little bit more about this. So,
Yeah.
I mean, so they have a core budget of, Jim, are you there?
Yes, I am, but I thought Ron was talking about the professional services line there. Is that?
Yeah, right. But an element of that is the community programming. And we have 3 programs for 50,000, so I just made an artificial rid of the 50, so I got up to 17. So you take the 17 for the area of community program, community outreach and all that, add that to the 125. That in relationship to the bottom numbers seems to me,
Yeah, but
it's not that consequential, frankly. And I'm wondering if it could be, if there's room in here to augment something that I think is maybe where post-pandemic, everybody's going in the cloud, all that area, if we could bring more insight to the people that, that the library is not a collection of books in a mausoleum.
Okay,
Which is my impression.
yeah, Jim, go ahead and talk about your part of this.
yeah. So setting aside that 50,000, the 125,000 really is. We have a budget each year that's in the vicinity of $400,000. We do a variety of things. Some of what I talked about at the last board meeting around our various promotional efforts. So really what I think is being proposed here is just some additional funding specifically for a campaign around a reintroduction of the library to the community, kind of the we're back and we're ready to serve you. A lot of our promotional efforts tend to go towards particular services and things that we do. This would be really sort of, kind of all out, this is the library messaging that is not what we always do because we have so many different things to focus on.
Yeah, Jim, my thought was though that is 125 enough?
That there is in our market. I mean, one thing I have to, we could always find a way to spend more, but we definitely want to spend it responsibly.
Well, prudentially, sure.
Yeah, and honestly, there is a point at which, particularly in our market, I'm not sure how much beyond that when you consider we're still going to have our budget for the year. I don't know how much additional we could possibly spend. Because the other piece of this is because this is a one-time expense out of this year's budget, we need to be able to spend it in the next 3 months. And so, that's a good deal of resource to put behind our messaging for a 3-month period. I can tell you that.
Okay, thank you.
And so that addresses that part, but the 50,000 really is to make sure. So for instance, and I'm just making this up, but what John does is he's going to come in and sit next to Dylan and say, walk me through your process on how you sign up somebody to do a beaded turkey program.
Sure.
And Dylan will say, well, we do this, then we do this. And then John will say, oh, that's interesting. So why are we picking up that paper with the left hand as opposed to the right hand? And that sort of thing with the ultimate goal being, and John, who works with us, has been very effective. His holds process that he's coming in to sort of do the checkup on, he actually documented that he's saving us $600,000 annually based on what we used to do compared to what we do now. And so that's the type of thing that we are looking to improve here without harming the outcome at all. So,
I think it's time for a motion to get this going.
okay, all right.
I move that we recommend this to the full board. This laundry list you've got here looks great.
Okay, so the official recommendation that the committee needs is that transfer from the operating fund to the capital project fund in the amount of $5,525,000. And
Yes, that's
and then the
correct.
rest of it would be information, so.
Yeah, and I think all the comments related to these matters beyond that figure are very appropriate and should be taken up again when we begin to review the new year's budget itself. So that would be appropriate time, I think, and we should keep this in mind, particularly with regard to Ron's just past comments about the public relations activities, to see whether or not the amount being recommended is sufficient for the coming year. So I appreciate that. So there has been a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Is everyone clear that we're talking about the figure again? Say the figure again, Steve.
The transfer amount is $5,525,000
To the capital fund.
to the capital fund from the operating.
All right. Is there a second?
Yeah, Ron.
Okay.
Ron seconded.
One second. Any further discussion on this item? Appreciate all the comments and questions. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the chairman votes aye, and the motion is approved, and that recommendation will be brought to the full board at the next meeting. Correct, Steve? Next
Yeah, that's
meeting?
right. That's what we'll do.
Okay.
So one more agenda item before we go to closed session. And so Cody, if you can hit that projections tab. This is when we're talking about the revenue projections for 21, 22. And so here's what we have. If you look at, this, basically we're taking a section of that 25-year projection, but we're looking at it in much more reasonable terms. The most recent years that have passed, along with the current year's estimate, which we've only got 3 months left, so that estimate's pretty solid. And then the proposal for 21, 22, which is what we use for our budgeting purposes. So what you can see is that our current estimate, our actual in fiscal year 20 was 57.2. Our estimate for this coming year is 60.5. And we're right on that right now in terms of receipts. Our proposal, again, we're not going crazy. We're not thinking that, money's going to start falling out of the sky. Our proposal is just a modest revenue increase to 61.6. So that's, it's only what, $900,000 is all the more that we're expecting to increase from this year to next year. To John's point, being conservative, not really knowing what the future is going to bring. So there's not a huge increase there. In terms of the next line shows you so that's our tax revenue. The next line is our other revenue. Quan and I are only projecting $1.1 million. So this is all revenue other than the taxes. Remember, 97% comes from taxes, so we shouldn't expect a large number here. The next line is the transfer to the capital project fund. We suggested 0 there. The reason we suggested 0 is because we're transferring $4 million to the capital projects fund based on what you just recommended less than a minute ago.
Is that 5.25 we just recommended?
Yeah, that's
different than the 4.
Yeah.
Two different numbers?
The 4 is part of that 5.25, the 5 million transfer in this year, because that's what we're talking about, the transfer into this year. But we're choosing not to transfer anything into next year's budget because we doubled the contribution this year.
It only says 4, so what's the difference?
It's the other things. It's the transfer for the technology.
I'm confused.
Oh,
It's okay.
yeah,
There were 3 items going to the capital fund,
4 actually, but yeah.
4, and then this
and
says
is just
4.
And this is just,
So that needs to say 525, right? Or not?
no, you're
Am I-
right.
I'm all wrong?
No, you're right. You're right.
I'm confused.
No, because Quan and I could not assume that you were going to
Oh, gotcha.
approve
Okay,
that
gotcha.
amount.
Yeah, I understand that. No
And
problem.
so we put the most
right.
reasonable amount in there.
Gotcha.
You're right.
I understand one out perfectly, yes.
We're going to update this to 5.5 after
I
this.
just need,
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
sorry.
No, keep me on my toes. You're right. So, so then the next number down is our bond payment. And then you get to what our expenditure amount, which is, which what we're recommending based on all of our projections, and based on our levy rate, which is, our current levy rate is 36 cents per hundred, essentially. That will generate revenue of $56.1 million after we do all of those things. So if we actually do generate $56.1 million, and Quan believes we will, and he's usually right on these things, or at least fairly close. So then what happens is we tend to allocate our spending based on 3 big benchmarks. So the first one is we target an allocation of no more than 60% on personnel expenses, 22% on material expenses, and 18% on operations. And so if you actually apply that, that means that the personnel expenses will go from 31 million to 33.6 next year. Material expenses will go from 10 million to 12.3 next year. And overhead expenses or operational expenses will go from 9 million to 10.2. And so then, if you remember, when we talked about the 25-year projection, I said one of those important lines to look at is where are we at the ending fund balance? You can see our ending fund balance is 48%, 48.1%. And our policy is that needs to be between, our target is between 42 and 48. Our policy is between 42 and 50. And so we are definitely in that sweet spot for where we need to be in terms of our expenditures for the coming year. And then everything down below actually talks about some remaining elements of the capital projects fund. So this is what we are projecting, and this is what we're budgeting based upon. Total budget revenue of $61.6 million. After we do some, paying of our bills, our capital, our certificate of participation, then we're at 56.1 million. 60% of that is 33 million. 22% for books and materials is 12 million. For all other overhead and operating is 10 million. And so, I mean, we feel confident about these numbers, and these are the numbers that we've been budgeting on. The first committee that will really start digging into this will be the Personnel Committee a little bit later this month. So that's
Thank you
where we
very
are.
much. Again, just a reminder, this is not the time at which we vote to approve or not approve this for recommendation to the full board, but it's a time when we get to see what is forming, what are the assumptions that are forming the budget that we will formally review very soon in a committee meeting for transmission to the board. And when it's been through the other committees as well. And so with that, I'd say, are there questions or suggestions related to these numbers or cautions or any comments that we find would be helpful to the administration as they actually prepare the final budget that's presented to us? Hearing none, I think perhaps it's time for us to move toward our next agenda item. There's no action required here, but we are proposing to do a closed session. I should mention that the closed session is related to issues regarding the both revenue and expenditure in the capital program, but these are items which involve possible
Oh,
and also items uh, uh, which look at changes that have taken place in the program, which are not surprising toward the
and you second.
Breaking up.
somebody.
Sorry.
So items of scope of work in the whole project. So there were a number of places. Let's use Parkville as an example, where we had an amount allocated for Parkville, but we knew that there would be change based upon the what was negotiated in terms of a lot of intricate land issues. And so that's one of the topics that we're considering. And the other is that we anticipate land acquisition in a number of cases, and all of this was taken up in closed session with the building committee at its last meeting. And it seemed appropriate that since it involves revenues and expenditures that are related to the budget, that we take it up in closed session also, so that the finance committee would be fully aware of these decisions that are being made regarding the capital fund, both revenue and expenditure. So with that, I would entertain a motion, unless there are questions, I would entertain a motion that we go into closed session for the purposes mentioned on the agenda that you have before you. Is that sufficient, Steve, Jonathan?
I think that'll work. And just for anybody who might be viewing this in the future or viewing this as we're streaming this, those items will be handled individually and will not be commingled within the executive session.
All pursuant to 610.025 RSMO.
Right.
Right. Okay. Is there such a motion
Move,
to session?
moved here.
Been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved, seconded. Now, as we vote, realize that there will have to be some technical things that have to happen, and so we'll hear about those if we vote to go into closed session. So it's been moved and seconded to go into closed session. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, we will move toward closed session. Cody, Steve, would you advise us how to proceed?
So we're going to turn this over to Cody. Cody, go ahead and do your magic. And when we are ready to go, please tell us so.
Okay. Yep. Let me stop the live stream and I will let you all know when we are good to go in the closed session.